Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when and where you are. It is actually a Monday afternoon where I am in York, not so sunny York, and very pleased to say that this is another Festival in a Box session 3.0, and we have with us the delightful and lovely David Cover, who is the global brand ambassador for Penderyn, and this is the Penderyn Sherrywood session, which I'm very much looking forward to. So let me just bring in David now. Good afternoon, David. How are you?
Hi, Eddie. Yeah, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm pretty good, actually. Pretty good, especially for the fact that I got to see you physically in person this year.
Yeah, in York and a couple of other times as well, Manchester and Liverpool. Yeah, it's been great to have those whiskey lounge sessions back up and running again.
Yes, I must admit, I don't think I realised quite how much I missed them until they actually came around and people started turning up. It was it was great.
It's different. I think it's been lovely doing like online stuff and working in my slippers, but at the same time, it's nice to get out there and actually like talk to people about the whiskies. And I think there's something about seeing people's eyes light up when they try a whiskey that they had no idea about before, and they're like, "Oh wow, like, that's amazing." You don't quite get that with the screens, I think.
Yeah, you definitely don't get the slippers. Are you wearing slippers at the moment, David?
I am actually. Any day I get to work in slippers is a good day.
Nice.
Particularly if I've got whiskey as well.
See, I have slippers, but I never got into the slipper habit. I don't know why. It seemed like such a good idea, but for whatever reason, I just never did it for me.
Well, you said it's wet in York. It's definitely wet and cold here in Wales as well. So
is it really?
It's slipper weather as well.
Yeah, it's definitely whiskey weather.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Anyway, David, listen. I know you very well, and we've shared one or two drams, should we say? But why don't you just introduce yourself and what it is you do with Penderyn to the assembled audience at home, who I'm sure would be glad to hear about it.
Yeah, of course. So my name's David, and I'm the global brand ambassador for Penderyn Distillery. And really, I kind of got into whiskey at university, and I really wanted to sort of explore this world of whiskey and wanted like a nice bottle for my 21st birthday. So that was something sort of that egged me on, and down the rabbit hole very much became sort of quite obsessed with learning about the different distilleries and why the whiskies tasted different. And that sort of forged my path into working for Penderyn, which was the local distillery to my university, really. So I went on a tour at Penderyn and then managed to get a job at the visitor centre part-time, and just sort of worked my way up through lots of different roles at the distillery, actually working in the distillery itself, or packing up boxes in the warehouse and bottling the whiskies. I feel like that's given me like a really good sort of base knowledge and understanding of the business and the whiskey production as well. And now I'm at the very, very lucky point where I get to go out and talk to people about our different whiskies all around the world, which is fantastic, and all our different markets, which is great. It's like one of the best jobs in the world. It's up there with astronaut, I think. Whiskey brand ambassadors and astronaut, about the same level, perhaps.
I was about to say there's slightly less risk involved with being a whiskey ambassador, but actually, on balance,
perhaps it can go wrong sometimes, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pitfalls that you can fall into.
Yeah. So it'd be fair to say that you've tried your hand at pretty much everything at the distillery. So you're, as you say, your knowledge of production through to actual bottling and labeling and boxing up and everything, it's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've done it all almost. I haven't quite been sort of rolling casks around the warehouse or anything like that. But yeah, pretty close. And I feel really lucky about that. You talk to a lot of people, and they say, I fell into the industry and feel really lucky to be here. Like I think a lot of people would say the same thing. But yeah, I definitely feel really lucky with the position that I'm in, and I love it every day. Learning something new and talking to people about whiskey is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, that's it's great to hear. Good to hear your naked enthusiasm still burning bright.
Absolutely.
Right. So we're going to taste your Sherrywood, David. So I'm going to pour myself a little dram.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Lovely sound. And why don't you tell us a bit about the Sherrywood and any particular quirks with the Sherrywood, versus the other bottlings. I mean, there's obviously the Sherrywood element.
Yeah.
And is there anything else which we should be aware of and looking out for?
Yeah, definitely. And the first thing I'd want to tell you about this whiskey is a story, actually, is that when I first went on the very first tour that I went to at Penderyn, when I was still a university student, I went with a friend and we did the tour of the distillery. We had a look around, and back then, actually, the distillery was so small that you didn't even go into the production area because it was just a still. And there was like a bottling line behind it. You got shown, some of the barrels, and you had a few tasters at the end and all of that. And I was super impressed with the whiskeys and with the setup and everything. And this Sherrywood version of our whiskey, this was the bottle that I ended up buying actually at the end of the tour, along with my first ever whiskey glass. So it has a lot of sort of good memories for me, this whiskey, and I think it's fantastic. It's actually still my favorite whiskey of our gold range, that we call it. And the gold range are always bottled at 46% alcohol. They're non-chill filtered, natural color. And this one, being the Sherrywood, is matured in sherry casks. But I think what's important with this one is that it isn't like a sherry bomb. It's not overwhelmingly sherried. It's not even full maturation in sherry, or it's not a sherry finish. It's actually a marriage of different cask types. So you start with 70% bourbon barrels, fully matured bourbon barrel Penderyn whiskies, and 30% sherry matured, fully matured sherried whiskies as well. So we're sort of combining these two different styles of whiskey. And usually the mix, the marriage, is that the bourbon barrel whiskey is younger, slightly younger, more vibrant, really fresh, really youthful. And the sherry matured whiskey is slightly older. And that's going to be bringing a little bit more maturity, more complexity to this whiskey, which I think strikes such a wonderful balance, because it's not over the top sherry. It's not a real in your face sherry bomb. It still has that classic Penderyn style where it's very light, it's delicate, has those sort of fruity notes in there as well, but it does have that complexity coming through from that slightly older sherried whiskey, with these sort of darker notes of dried fruit and raisins and plums, that kind of thing. And a little bit of woodiness, spiciness in there as well. There's some wonderful, wonderful notes to this whiskey. It's nicely layered, I think. There's like lots of different layers of flavor coming into this, which make it just wonderful and complex and interesting and balanced. I have so many good things to say about this this whiskey.
Would it be fair to say you like it, David?
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, like it being like one of our whiskeys, one of Penderyn's whiskeys, that's what I would be saying. But in particular, this Sherrywood, I think, is just wonderful. Yeah.
And sorry if you mentioned this, but are you able to say what is there a variety of different sherries as well as sherry casks? So Olorosos and.
So traditionally with this one, it is Oloroso sherry, so it's slightly sweeter, but not too sweet, not into your sort of PX sherry. But yeah, Oloroso sherry is generally what we're using for this expression. But in the last couple of years, we've been experimenting a lot more with different types of sherry casks. And I was in the warehouse a month or two ago, and it's just crazy walking around the warehouse, seeing all these different sherry casks and loads of different cask types I'd never even heard of, or never even heard that we had access to, or that we had in our warehouse maturing. So I think there's a lot of sort of exciting stuff to come with limited editions and single casks and stuff that we can do with that. But generally for this version, it is Oloroso.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Penderyn is no longer what we would describe as a new distillery. We've been around for a good amount of time now, maybe 20 years, I would think.
21 years this year.
21 years. So obviously that would mean that there probably is a stash of casks that have been maturing maybe that little bit longer, and little parcels of this, that, and the other. So I'm sure it's quite an exciting time, because you're going to be able to taste some real gems apart from the core range. Oh yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the stuff that we're looking at the moment at releasing very shortly is very, very exciting. And we were looking at releasing a 21st anniversary whiskey that contains some of our older whiskies. I can't say when that's gonna be here, when that's gonna arrive, but that was something that we're very much looking at. And all sorts of sort of wonderful limited editions and single casks, which is really encouraging to see, because at one point, we only had a couple of single casks
every year that were really chosen as the best Penderyns that we had in the warehouse at that time. And those would be quite expensive, a little bit inaccessible to people. So I think it's great to see a few more of these limited editions coming out, more experimental releases from us that, that challenge perhaps what we've done previously.
Yeah, just back to the Sherrywood for, let's just get some information on the screen there. So what should we expect at full strength on the nose and the palate?
I get a lot of this. As I said, one of the things that I really like about this whiskey is that it has these layers of different flavors. So I think initially, it has that light, delicate sort of Penderyn spirits coming through. There's a bit of, I would describe it as almost like peach there, and there's orange, a little bit of sort of chocolatiness, I think, as well on the taste. Some people describe this as quite a Christmassy whiskey. I think our Portwood is a little bit more Christmassy, but some people get sort of Christmas cake type note to it as well. It's this sort of dried fruit coming through, which I think is really, really nice. And on the taste, I think there's a bit of spiciness in there, definitely coming through from the wood, the oak. There's a bit of sort of dry oakiness in there as well, which is definitely tamed by just a drop of water. Will sort of tame that and round the whole whiskey out a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, well, I've just tasted it without water, and it's eminently acceptable. It has to be said. It's a real lovely, rounded, spicy mouthful. I've just added a little bit of water to it just to see what happens with that.
Yeah, I think generally the Penderyn whiskies, they can start off sweeter and they end quite dry. It tends to be the sort of development. You see that again and again with different expressions of Penderyn. They're sort of starting off sweet and then they develop into this sort of drier finish, which I think is lovely. And this one has a really nice long finish as well. It kind of lingers with the little spiciness and a little bit of sort of mouth watering. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's definitely a dram you could enjoy at Christmas for sure. So interesting, actually, adding water to it. I got a real kind of poached pear on the nose without water, and it's still there, but now it's kind of been smothered by almost like a salted caramel or something. It's a really lovely, almost custardy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say salted caramel with this one, and a bit of nuttiness as well, like almond or marzipan, that type of thing.
Yeah, I would say it's equally delicious with water, but you maybe lose a little bit of the intensity of the full strength, which you always do, when you add water to whiskey. But I'm happy with both.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, we may have covered this before, but I'm sure there's people watching who haven't seen a presentation by yourself or folks at Penderyn. In terms of the distilling process at the distillery itself, which is obviously it's a single malt whiskey, but the stills themselves are quite different to anything else out there. They're not your common or garden copper pot stills. So can you just maybe in a nutshell give us a description of the lovely Faraday stills and how they differ from the regular?
So as you said, Eddie, we use a Faraday still, which is really quite different from what a lot of other distilleries are using. For instance, with a lot of Scotch whiskies are double distilled, Irish whiskey tends to be triple distilled, and if you look at the shape of those stills, they're normally quite squat and sort of curvy in their shape. And you're doing multiple distillations to get the alcohol to a high enough strength. So we're using this. I don't know if you can see that very well, but this is a little postcard here, Faraday Still. And it has two columns to it that have plates on the inside, copper plates, where the alcohol's evaporating and it's having to hit one of these plates in the column here. This is the first part of the still here. And then it's dropping back down as a liquid, redistilling, rising off again, hitting another higher plate. So it's kind of it's almost like a hybrid between a pot and a column still. It does have columns to it, it does have plates to it, but it is a batch distillation as well. It's not a continuous distillation. The entire still is made of copper. And it's really doing a very, very good job at distilling the alcohol to a very, very high strength while keeping a lot of flavor to the spirit as well. I think a lot of people look at the still and they think, oh, it's a column still. The whiskey is going to be, very neutral. And you taste the New Mix spirit as it comes straight off the still. It's like 90% or just over 90% alcohol. So very, very, very pure. And you add a bit of water, quite a lot of water, and you get these wonderful flavors, coming off it. It's really quite fruity. And that comes down to the design of the still, also the fermentation that we're doing. 3-day fermentation tends to be a little bit longer than you need to, just to allow some of those fruity flavors to sort of start developing in the fermentations. So that's really coming through the still into the spirit. It's not neutralizing it completely. So originally we only had one of those stills, and then we installed the second one in 2014 as we were sort of expanding and growing the business. And now we actually have a second distillery where we have one of these stills as well. So I would say that kind of defines our style. For me, that is the main difference between our whiskey and any other. It's the style of the whiskey is really created by this very different Faraday still that we're using. And it's called a Faraday still because it was designed by Dr. David Faraday, who is a descendant of Michael Faraday. And it's completely unique to Penderyn as well. There's not a single distillery in the whole world that has another Faraday still that's exactly like ours. So even though there are distilleries that use column stills, hybrid stills, this one is unique to us. And yeah, I think really gives the whiskies such an interesting flavor.
It's definitely, I mean, it's obviously worth going to visit Penderyn when situations allow anyway, but
yeah,
I think going to see the Faraday still and watching it in operation is definitely a highlight, and is worth the admission price alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of whiskeys.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us about the second distillery, because there's a third distillery in the works as well, is there not?
Yeah. We're nothing if not ambitious. We had the first distilleries in the village of Penderyn, which is in the Brecon Beacons, the national park here in South Wales. And we decided a couple of years ago that what we had was fantastic. We were looking to grow the business. What's next for us, and also what's next for sort of Welsh whiskey in general. And we were looking at building a new distillery rather than doing a sort of big expansion at Penderyn. And we found a couple of sites. The original, the first site that we found was actually in Swansea, but it's taken a little bit longer than we thought. So actually that's still being built at the moment. And the distillery we've just opened is in Llandudno, which is on the very, very north of Wales, like the very, very north tip of Wales. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place. Really, really stunning sort of seaside town, wonderful scenery, wonderful water, of course, as well. And we've built this distillery in like an old school building, which is fantastic. They've sort of kept some of the old details of the building, which I think is really nice. Like the architecture is wonderful. That they've got this sort of glass front at the back, but then they've kept all the old detailing of the tiles, and the flooring is all the original flooring restored. I think they've done a really amazing job with that. But to me, as a sort of more of a whiskey nerd, the more exciting part is that in Llandudno, we're actually looking at doing something we've never, ever done before, which is producing a peated whiskey. We do actually a version called Penderyn Peated, but it's matured in peated barrels rather than the barley being peated, rather than the malt being peated. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how this whiskey is distilled. It's coming off a Faraday still, so it's being distilled to a higher strength, and how the smoke is sort of going to come through into that spirit, and then how that's going to mature over the years. So it's very, very early days still at the moment, because the distillery started up in May. So we've got a long time to wait still, I'm afraid. But yeah, it's getting there. I think it's really, really exciting. And then the Swansea distillery hopefully will be open next year as well.
Okay. Well, a couple of questions arise from that. First of all, what's the name of the distillery at Llandudno?
It's the Penderyn Lloyd Street Distillery.
Okay.
Because it's on Lloyd Street in Llandudno. Yeah.
Okay.
But we've kept the Penderyn name.
Okay. So how are you going to differentiate between the two, on the shelf and that kind of thing? Is it going to be easy for people to spot the?
It hopefully will be. Yeah. That's kind of yet to be decided, yet to be figured out. I'm sure our marketing team will come up with a great idea. But yeah, no, I can completely understand that there would perhaps be a confusion there between the original Penderyn and Penderyn Lloyd Street. So we'll definitely try and make it very clear that the whiskies are different. Perhaps they'll be in different packaging, different labels, and try to keep the sort of clarity of the brands quite separate.
Mm-hmm. And can people visit the new distillery, or is it?
They can indeed, yeah, absolutely. We've got a visitor centre sort of all set up that's doing tours and masterclasses, has a shop open, and I think they're running a deal at the moment where it's 2 tours for the price of 1. So if you happen to be in the area of Llandudno, yeah, that's a fantastic deal to take advantage of, definitely.
Probably just to clarify, that doesn't mean you can go twice if you're on your own.
I think you'd have to discuss that with the reception. Maybe you could go around. You just go back around again
in disguise.
in a loop. There was a TV series that happened. I'm sure. Is it Still Life? I think an episode of Still Life. The Scottish guys, they go around a distillery and then they keep going around all day. Very, very drunk by the end. Well worth looking up. I think it's on YouTube.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Oh, that's. I mean, it's great to hear, because obviously Penderyn is nicely established now and producing fantastic whiskies as we're tasting there. But it's good to hear that the ambition doesn't stop with the one distillery, but and you actually got 2 and now a 3rd in the works. So exciting times ahead. Can I just ask you a sort of broader question in terms of the whiskey industry? Because obviously Penderyn, even though it's in the UK, is still classed as a world whiskey, and I think I'm getting increasingly not frustrated, but I think that the term world whiskey is going to have to change at some point, because obviously there's a Welsh whiskey movement, there's an English whiskey movement, there's French whiskey, Taiwanese whiskey, etc., etc. And at some point, I think that's going to have to be recognised. And I know that you guys are working quite closely with other Welsh distillers in terms of forming a Welsh Whiskey Association to reflect the Scotch Whisky Association, which has obviously been around for donkey's years. What's your current feeling about the whiskey industry as a whole, and maybe some comments about the movement towards a Welsh Whisky Association as well?
I think it is amazing to see in the last couple of years how many world whiskies have been popping up. Well, world whiskies, we'll use the term, and there's been so much going on. It's been hard to keep up, really. It's been great to see what's going on in Wales as well, with so many other distilleries, coming about and starting to do their own thing as well. And we've definitely been looking at forming very close ties with them, and even working towards a protected geographical indicator, which would be really good. I think a really good step forward with Welsh whiskey, as well as an association of some sort. But yeah, I think the term world whiskey has started to become a bit redundant. Perhaps it's too broad a term. I think 5 years ago it kind of worked because there were so few, and now that so many different styles are emerging, that's really, really hard to pin down. As you say, oh, you try this world whiskey, that person has no idea what to expect from that. So yeah, perhaps it does need to change, and things are going to become maybe more specific. I think one of the evolutions that we've seen definitely is with Japanese whiskey. As Japanese whiskies become more popular, and even in the average person on the street, in their mind, who knows nothing about whiskey whatsoever, doesn't even like whiskey, seems to know now that Japanese whiskey is a thing, that Japanese whiskey is meant to be the best. And I think that's had huge repercussions for the whiskey industry in general, and very positive repercussions for actually a lot of world whiskies, what were classified as world whiskies, because Japanese whiskey was always seen as a world whiskey. So I think people have started to realize that it's not only Scotland and Ireland and the US or Canada, that can produce really good quality whiskies. You can produce good quality whiskey, wherever you are in the world, as long as you're putting the quality into the bottle and you're focused on that quality and producing the right things and taking your time over the process. And I think that's a really important thing that started happening, like not only in whiskey circles, but in the broader public's mind. I think that's going to have these sort of big repercussions for the whiskey industry in general. And Japanese whiskey, I think, is in a class of its own now. A lot of people know it as Japanese whiskey, not part of the world whiskey industry. So yeah, I think things are changing, and I think they're changing for the better as well.
That's a very good point because, as you say, Japanese whiskey is now known as Japanese whiskey and not really lumped in with so-called world whiskies. So I wonder if there's a period that you have to qualify to
endure.
I think you guys would definitely be high up in that level because having been around for 21 years, I think. And I think that people do talk about Penderyn as a Welsh whiskey, as opposed to a world whiskey. So I think
something else that we've seen it with as well is even English whiskey. It was amazing to see in York recently when we were at the Whiskey Lounge show in York, how many English whiskies there were there. But not only that, because there's been a lot of English whiskies around for a while now, but how excited people were about them as well. They were like really excited to try, the latest thing from Spirit of Yorkshire or the Lakes and that's a sort of subtle shift I think that's been happening over the last couple of years as well. So I think it's on its way. I think it is happening sort of naturally over time, perhaps.
Well, I think not to blow too much hot air up your proverbial, David, but I think you guys can be thanked by particularly the new English distillers and various other distilleries from around the world, because I remember when you guys first started coming to our shows, and there was a bit of resistance, I think, and I think people weren't quite so ready to welcome whiskey from anywhere other than the traditional areas or so-called traditional areas with open arms in the same way as they do now. Because you're right, we've been doing these shows a long time, almost as long as you guys have been distilling, and you can see that the change of landscape and also the change of attitude, and people are far more happy to accept and to try whiskies from all over the place than they were 20 years ago or so.
Yeah, definitely. I think if anything, we started a distillery before it was really sensible to. in the year 1999, we formed the company. Year 2000, the distillery started, and it was just laughable that there would be a Welsh whiskey of any kind of discernible quality at all. And I think there was a lot of hard years, but I think the last decade, things have changed very, very substantially, and people are a lot more experimental with what they want to try as well. I think if you look 20 years ago, the habits of whiskey drinkers were they went and bought that same bottle that they've always bought the last 10 or 20 years, and they only drink that blended whiskey, and they always get it from the same shop down the street, and those were the habits of whiskey drinkers. I think now people are experimenting more and want to try different things. They want to try different whiskies, want to see whiskies from different barrel types and all this stuff. And that's really, really encouraging to see. I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely. And a final question, David, and I think I know the answer to this. I'll be disappointed if I don't. Outside of whiskey, which obviously you're a big fan of, what's your tipple of choice?
Oh, you see, my tastes have been changing a little bit because I never liked beer very much at all. I was always a whiskey drinker through and through, and if I was down at the pub, I would have a cider probably. And recently, the last few years, especially since traveling a little bit in Germany and America, I've really gotten into beer, and I've been very much enjoying stuff that breweries have been bringing out here in the UK. Has been fantastic. Particularly some of the stronger IPAs, good sort of New England style, like double IPA, double dry hopped IPA. That's my zone right there. I've been really, really enjoying that at the moment. Is that what you would have guessed? Is that what you would have thought?
I'm relieved, yes, because that's
okay. Good.
That's where I thought you were. Did you come to the Cloudwater pub in Manchester with us after the festival?
No, because I was trapped in my hotel room with COVID.
Oh, of course,
in Manchester. Right. Yeah, I'd spent three days trapped in my hotel room.
Honestly,
I would have loved to. Yeah.
Well, next time you're in Manchester, let me know, and I'll give you the address, or even better, I'll meet you there, because you would have absolutely loved it. It was brilliant.
I think actually you guys introduced me to my favorite brewery in the UK, which is Northern Monk in Leeds.
Oh, right. Yeah,
I absolutely love the stuff they do. And the only reason I knew about them was when I was just starting to enjoy beer a little bit more. We did a whiskey lounge tasting at their original brewery, at their original site.
Right.
And it went fantastically. And someone said, "Oh, you've got to try, like a little third of something before you go." I was like, "Oh, I'm driving. I'm not going to. I don't really like beer that much anyway. I'll try it." And it was stunning. It's fantastic. Now I love their stuff.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So that'll be beer and whiskey for Christmas for you then.
Absolutely, yeah. I hope so. If I've been good.
Yeah. No comment.
Yeah.
Well, listen, David, it's been brilliant, and thanks so much for getting involved yet again. It's always great to talk to you and to taste your lovely whiskies. I wish you the best, and undoubtedly we'll see you next year for Whiskey Lounge festivals and whatever else you're getting up to. But for the time being, thanks so much. So what's the Welsh equivalent of slange?
I was just going to say, Yachida.
That's it. Yachida.
Yachida,
David, and speak to you very soon.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Bye.
And thanks everyone at home. Hope you're enjoying. Thank you. Bye.